As I'm wheeling my garden cart out here, you may hear the crunch of leaves because we are getting into late fall. I'm bundling up as the weather's starting to turn really chilly. We've had a few really nice cold nights where the frost has come and started to make all the leaves drop. Everything is starting to go dormant in the garden. We're starting to put it to sleep. We're thinking about hibernation for the upcoming months. But before I fully hibernate, I want to think, what else do I want to do in the garden? And that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to actually plant some daffodil bulbs. Now, you know, bulbs are beautiful, but they often are planted at a time of year where we're starting to think of not working outside. We're getting chilly, usually around 50 degrees during the day is when I like to plant them, and it starts getting 30 or below at night. That means it's going to be cold enough to plant these bulbs so they don't want to sprout. But what we're going to do today is plant about 150 daffodil bulbs. Now, it sounds like a lot. Honestly, you're going to see it's not a lot. And what's great is with daffodils, they're going to give you year after year of beautiful blooms, really without any more work than this first time of planting them. So I have a few different options here of how we could plant them. I'm going to take you through all the steps so you can see that whether you want to plant 5 bulbs, 150 bulbs, maybe 500 or 1,000 bulbs, it really is the same process. It's really simple. So we're going to start planting because you know what? It's time, and next year, we're gonna be so glad we took the time on a chilly day this year to do it. To start here, you can see in my garden cart, I have everything I'm gonna use today. So we have our daffodil bulbs. They're always a nice, beautiful bulb, and what you always wanna check here first is make sure they're nice, in the sense that when you open them up, make sure they're firm and have everything kind of attached. Now, if you find one like this one that's getting soft, you can tell it's starting to wanna rot. Those ones aren't going to be good. So you're always going to find probably a couple anymore that aren't going to be the best. And there's no reason in planting a bulb that is already rotting. So always check through, make sure they're in good condition, make sure they're nice and firm and have, you know, exactly the look they should. These have the nice husk on them. If some of that husk comes off, don't worry about that. They can still be planted. Same with tulips. If that husk comes off, they can be planted. And what we have here are a few different options. We have augers. Now I have a larger auger, probably it's like a 5 or 7 inch, and then I have more the 3-inch augers. So it kind of depends. When it comes to daffodils, I usually like to do them in groupings, anywhere from 3 to 5 bulbs per spot, just so you have plenty of blooms. Usually in the first year you have 1 or 2 blooms. In successive years they will start putting on more bulbs and keep growing and multiplying. You'll have more, but it's nice to start off with a few. So a bigger hole will allow me to put a few more bulbs in them. I also have a shovel, because sometimes a shovel just works best. So it really can be whatever works for you. And I do always have my bulb tone with me. Bulb tone is just gonna have a little bit of food, so once those sprout in the spring, their roots start going into the ground, they're gonna have something that can feed them, that they can eat and nourish themselves right away so they become bigger and stronger. That's what bulb tone does. It's a great mixture of exactly what they need once they go. Now I do have underneath here too a few bulbs that a friend sent me of a mixture of different allium. I may put them in the same area and I may not. What I'm doing first is really just laying out my bulbs all along here as I want to do them. And I decided what I'm going to do is really 2 rows of planting them in between all the various perennials that are here. Now in the spring when they come up first, you're just going to see their foliage. You're not going to really see the perennial growth other than maybe a little bit of last year's kind of growth. Usually after winter, most of the snow is knocking down a lot of the perennials. So I'm going through and laying usually 3, sometimes 4 bulbs in a place, making sure I check them as I go. Now, the beautiful thing to remember about bulbs is it all depends what type of bulb, how deep you plant it. So usually you want to think 2 to 3 times the size of the bulb, but always double check with what you're planting. For daffodil bulbs, I like to go 6 to 8 inches deep. And they need to be a certain depth because if they're planted too shallow, they could get too cold over the winter, and if they freeze, they could rot. So while bulbs do need chill hours, that's the dormant time they need to be cold, usually 35 to 45 degrees, which is where it stays about 6 inches into the ground. That chill time is what gives them that dormancy they need. And then in the spring, when they just slightly start warming up, that's when they're sparked to realize it's time to bloom. They start putting in roots and start pushing out that flower. To give you a better depiction here, you can see I have just placed the bulbs at the moment where I want to put them, and then that's where I'm going to dig my hole. Now this last year I did put drip line over all these beds, and I did not dig it in yet or cover it, and I'm glad because now I know where to avoid when I'm digging, both with my auger or a shovel. So I don't want to have to hit this. That's always an important thing. Check anything in your area. If you're worried about underground wiring or don't know where it's at, have it marked by your locate service. If you have drip line, make sure you know where it is and mark it. So in this case, I've not covered it with mulch. I can see easily and go in between and around my drip line. Now, as you can see, I'm putting these about 2 rows and offsetting them all the way down. Now here I usually put pots in the spring, so I'm gonna leave that empty. But then the whole way down this path, you can see I'm just gonna be placing some daffodils. So next spring, both from the house and when I'm outside working, we're gonna see this big flush of yellow color. Now, every year, I'm hoping to add more daffodils to this area. So eventually the whole way back will just be a sea of those yellow buttercup, beautiful tea saucer looking flowers, which is what I'm really excited for. When I'm using a plant auger, which I really like, what I like is I like to measure how far up I need to go. So I know, and you can even mark it if you want to, I know that, 3 rings up is 6 inches down, whatever works for what auger you would be using. That way you don't have to constantly be checking the hole every time you're doing the auger, because it's hard to take it out, put it back in. This is a more heavy duty one, so I can get a bigger hole. But it's an easy way to make sure that you're getting the right depth without having to go to as much work or measure it in between. Now, once I have my hole dug, that's when I'll put a little bit of the bulb tone in. You can just sprinkle it in too. And then you can just put your beautiful daffodil bulbs right down in it. So an auger can make really quick work, but it only makes so big of holes. So if you're wanting to do big swaths of this, I would suggest actually scraping back big areas of earth, whether it's 5 by 5, 10 by 10, placing all your bulbs on in rows if you want to do a mass planting, and then covering that up so you can kind of do them in mass and in sheets at a time. I'm doing more holes, as you can see, with 4 or 5 bulbs, so it's not too hard to actually do it like this, cover them up, and then move on. When you're going to do, no matter what bulbs you're actually wanting to plant, make sure you plant them in the right direction. So each bulb, while they have different shapes, roughly have the same makeup. So usually they're gonna have a bottom that looks like they have a root. Sometimes the root is attached, sometimes it's clean. Usually on a tulip bulb, there will be no roots attached like these daffodil ones have. But most bulbs have some form of a point at the top, and that's where that flower stem and leaves are gonna come out next year. Now with daffodils, it's always very easy. You can see kind of where they were cut off. You can see a really rough stem if I bring this up so you can see it well, and you can see those roots. Tulips will have more of just a smooth point at the top. But either way, you always wanna have the point or that end where the stem and flower is going to come out towards the top, the roots or that flat side facing down. That way in the spring, they're going to be able to know how to go right away. Now, different bulbs, again, just check on your area, your planting zone, and the proper place and time to plant them. Bulbs like full sun, but the wonderful thing to remember is in the spring, there's no leaves on the trees. So most areas are full sun, even if they have some cover later on. I got my first row done, and now I'm going through and pushing all my bulbs aside to do my next row. Now, as you can see, it goes really quick when you have the right tools, depending how you want to plant them and how many you're planting. Now, I'm gonna go through with the auger again, but if you noticed, I was slightly using the trigger on the auger to slow it down because I was close to my path. Didn't want to kick up too much soil onto the path if possible, just so I don't have that debris going down and eventually creating a lot of soil buildup and then weeds. But I'm gonna use the same auger now on this row. My ground right now, my soil, is very beautiful to work in. Not only do I have good ground, but we've had good rain. And that moisture makes it really easy to be able to plant. Now, otherwise, augers work really well in dry soil. You just have to be a little bit more careful on how you hold them to make sure you have the strength and it doesn't kick back on you. So I'm gonna go through now and do my second row. What I like about the plant auger, it makes really quick work, especially in between large perennials. So this is only the second year for a lot of these perennials, from prairie dropseed to Baptisia, but it still gets in around them without having to trim too much back. You could trim some back if you wanted to. You know I like to leave my perennial foliage over the winter, but you could trim it back. The wonderful thing is Baptisia grows very aggressively and quickly, can have some pretty big roots, but the auger gets through them with no problem, so I don't have to worry about it. And I'm not damaging the plant at all by putting that auger through a few of the roots. So I'm just able to quickly go through without really any disturbance to the overall bed, and that's what makes it really nice. I'm finishing up my last 2 spots, which is good because I'm pretty much out of my bulb tone, so I guess that's my past self not preparing enough, telling my future self, you're gonna be done after that much. But honestly, I know the video could be shortened a lot, but this has really only taken me an hour or less to do all these bulbs. And that's kind of the joy of bulbs. You can take a little bit of time in the fall when things are slowing up, when kind of the earth and the garden is telling you to slow up. You can do one last item and then be ready for spring. Now remember, the essential part here is the chill hours. These are going to be dormant now in the soil over the winter, staying at that 35 to 45 degrees because we plant them at the correct depth. If you want to mimic that and put them in pots, you can put them in containers, but you can't just leave them out in the open elements for all winter because they could freeze solid and then they would rot. So you may have to put them in a protected shed, put insulation around them, put them somewhere where they will stay in that 35 to 45 degree mark. Sometimes you can even put them in a fridge if you just want to put the bulbs in the fridge to mimic that and then plant them later. So I have all this finished up. It's a really good feeling because now we are going to get a lot of rain. So over the next few days, we're forecast to get multiple inches of rain. So I'm not going to water these in. I'm going to let Mother Nature do that for me. It's always good to water just to, you know, kind of bring that soil back together. It will of course be good for the bulbs in the spring. You don't want them to sit in water by any means. They like to dry out well, but it will help any displaced soil or air pockets really compact back together. So I hope this inspires you and excites you to plant a few bulbs because next year you're going to be really glad you went to this work on a cool day.